Here, and welcome to Hidden Ways That You're Controlling and What to Do About It. I wanted to bring up this topic today because so many of us tend to try to control too much in our relationships, and I wanted to speak to that because there can also be a lot of shame around being a control freak or being overly controlling, and so I just wanted to shed light on this topic. If you are watching live, drop a hashtag live in the comments or a hashtag replay if you're dropping the replay. I love to know who's here with me, and this way we can connect. Also, if you're interested in having the show notes from this episode, drop the word notes in the comments and I will get those to you after the fact. Those usually get done within 24 hours. All right. Who's here? Hey, hi, live. I can't see who you are. You need to give permission to StreamYard to show who you are, but my guess is maybe you are inside of my Facebook group, and that's why I can't see who you are. So hi, glad you're here live with me, and I'd love to know who you are, if you're willing to share your name. And I have this amazing assessment. So I just want to let you know before we get started that a really great way to begin changing things in your relationships is to get a clear snapshot of what's going on. So if you're partnered or you're single, I have a different assessment for each. Please drop the appropriate word in the comments and I'll make sure you get the link to take that assessment. It takes about 5 minutes and you just get a really clear read on what's working great and where to focus your attention. Because sometimes it can be like, oh, something feels off, but I don't really know what to do. This assessment can help you clarify that. Oh, hi. All right, Kevin, good to see you. Awesome. I will send you that. Hi, Carol. Welcome. So today we are talking about hidden ways that you're controlling and what to do about it. And I really wanted to talk about this because it can be kind of hard to know when you're being controlling, because sometimes being controlling gets mixed up with having clear boundaries or preferences or things like that. And so I just wanted to tease apart what feels like controlling behavior and how to shift that and where it's likely coming from. So the first thing I want to say about control is we tend to control, like get into excessive control because we're scared, either of our own inner chaos. This can also apply to excessive self-control, right? If there's zero permission to be imperfect and you have to be on all the time and constantly productive, that's a form of excessive self-control. And it's likely coming, as it did for me when that was my MO, it's likely coming out of not fully trusting yourself and not trusting how chaotic things are inside. Similarly, on the outside, if the things were chaotic on the outside when you were growing up, you might have developed this need to control so that you could feel safer. So it's totally understandable. So the first thing I want to say about control is no shame. It is what it is, and have compassion for yourself. If this is a way that you learned how to feel safe, okay, that's okay. And for the health of your relationships, it's great to loosen the grip, honestly, and let people be who they are. So I'd love to hear from you what ways that you feel control tends to get in the way in relationships. What have you noticed? I'd love to hear that as I continue talking. By the way, if you don't already know me, I'm Marie Elizabeth Molly. I'm a relationship transformation expert, also known as a relationship alchemist, and I help people transform the patterns that have been getting in the way of having the love, connection, intimacy, joy in their relationships like they've always wanted. And so that's why I wanted to talk about control today, because that's a major pattern that tends to get in the way. So the first piece, as I said, is recognize that your tendency to control came from somewhere. Either you felt super chaotic inside and you had to impose control to try to get stuff done, or things that were super chaotic around you and you had to become controlling to maintain a sense of safety, to feel safe, basically. One difference. So what signifies control as opposed to healthy boundaries or preferences or things like that, or requests, is when you create a lot of rules instead of holding a boundary. So a boundary, as one of my favorite quotes, and the author of the quote is escaping me. I'm sure it'll pop in my head in a minute, but it hasn't yet. One of my favorite quotes is, boundary walls keep people out. Boundaries teach people where the door is. And that is, a boundary is how you feel safe to open. Now, that can be easily confused with a rule, because it might seem like rules make it safe to open. But there's a way that rules are imposed from the outside, and you're certainly imposing them on somebody else, and they're imposing them on you if they have a lot of rules. And to me, they're more conditional. Now, some of this that I'm saying may land with you, it may not. I'm speaking out of my experience and what I see in my practice. Oh, this is such a great comment. Yes, this can be so confused. When I ask men for what I want, one particular person always says, me asking for what I want is me trying to control everything. Exactly. And I say that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing at all. So the difference being, as I see it, and tell me if this is true for you, Giordani, the difference between asking for what you want and trying to control everything is, when you're trying to control everything, it's coming out of an element of fear. Like, I need it to be like this or else, or it will feel bad, or I will feel bad, or maybe you're going to punish them. But there's a fear-based reason that you're controlling. Whereas when you're asking for what you want, you're asking for what you want. It's a request, ideally. If it's a demand, then maybe we're falling into control. But if it's a request where somebody has the permission to say yes or no and not be punished for it, that's the difference. So either in the person you're speaking about, either, could you, Dana, would you do me a favor and look up, it's Mark somebody, but just spacing the last name of who said that quote. So if I were getting feedback that me asking for what I want felt like me trying to control everything, I would look into, am I actually making a demand that sounds like a request? Maybe there's some energetic charge or some energetic transmission happening that it's like, oh, if you don't do this, I'm going to be unhappy. Like, they don't feel the space to say no. The other option is that that person has trouble saying no anyway. And so rather than confront their own people-pleasing tendencies, they put the blame on the person making the request, right? So there's lots of reasons why somebody might be saying that, and there might be validity and there might not be. And so that's going to be a situational thing to figure out. Is there validity? Am I trying to control everything or not? Graves, thank you very much. Mark Graves said, walls keep everybody out, boundaries show people where the door is. Thank you so much, Dana. So back to control. Now, I really want to highlight this piece. When we are acting out of fear instead of desire, we will tend to control. If we're acting out of desire, if we're asking for something we want because it feels good, because we want it, and the person is free to say yes or no, which is the key to it being different than a demand, then that's not control. That's simply having a healthy relationship to your own desire and feeling enough self-worth to ask for it, which are both great things, of which I'm a fan. So if you discover that you're making a request that's actually a demand, or you're trying to control everything that's happening excessively because you need that to feel safe, I invite you to consider, what is the fear that's underlying this current attempt to control that's happening? What are you actually afraid of? Get clear on what that is. Then be compassionate with yourself about having that fear. Don't beat yourself up about it. Like, we all have underlying fears that are in our system based on how we grew up and what we've learned from the culture and everything else. So be compassionate with yourself, but also be clear-eyed. Look at it and go, oh yeah, wow, I'm trying to control because I'm afraid of XYZ. And, I'm afraid they're going to leave me. I'm afraid that nothing will happen unless I make it happen. For my go-getters, that could be a big one. There can be all kinds of fear underlying our need to control. Once you're clear on what the fear is, get curious about it and ask yourself what the desire is that's underneath the fear. So, and when you're clear on what the desire is, how do you ask vulnerably for that instead of imposing rules or trying to control the situation too much? So I'm going to run through that again because it was a lot in a short amount of time. Hey, Jasmine. Yes, I'd love to know what you're saying yes to. And thank you for that note, Giordani. Great point. Request versus demand. Yes, they're not the same thing. A request includes the permission for someone to say yes or no. Like, energetically, that can be felt. Like, they know they are free to say yes or no, and that they're not going to get punished for their no. A demand has the threat of punishment in it. And again, this may not be in the words. This may just be in what is felt, because we're always feeling each other at the same time as we're listening to the words. And a lot of times the control piece might be happening here in the energetic, even if the words are shiny and perfect and nice. And, maybe you're very well trained in communication techniques and you know how to say things super pretty, but underneath there's this thing going on. Well, someone's going to react to that. They're just going to react to that, and you're not going to know why necessarily, and they're not going to know why, but they're going to be reacting to something. And it is worth getting to know what that something is, so you can do something about it, so you can tend to yourself, you can care for yourself there, you can give yourself what you need, so you can show up with less fear toward the other person. Oh, I get it. So Jasmine says she so relates to fear that nothing gets done without me. Yeah, me too. I think I call it the curse of competence. When you're the person that people come to because they know you're going to get shit done, then it becomes really hard to delegate, to let go of control, to off-source, responsibility, because you've been the person for so long that others come to. Oh, that's great. That's a beautiful admission. So Giordani says, I didn't feel the protector and provider in him. So I can see how I probably was getting worried about him not being what I really want and need. Yeah, beautiful. So clear. And so I can see how that worry could translate energetically over there in the other person as feeling controlled. Because when we are afraid, we tend to control, right? I was talking with Patrick about this earlier, and like last week, and he said something really interesting. He said, it's not that what you ask is so different when you're trying to control versus not trying to control. It's more about the state that you're in. And I thought that was a really astute observation, that that asking for the same thing in a clear state from desire, connected to yourself and your pleasure and what you want, that the same thing, when requested from a space of fear, from a space of anxiety or agitation, or just when you're knocked off center, that same exact thing could land completely differently with the other person. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. If you're getting feedback that you're controlling, look at your state. Is there a way that you might need to self-regulate better? Maybe you need some support in learning some breathing exercises, or up your meditation practice, or move your body more. If a lot of energy gets locked in your body and you're not moving it enough, that can often translate as anxiety. That can often come out as a kind of heightened, yes, exactly. It happens when I'm anxious, says Dana. Yeah, so this is so astute. I think I have a lot of fear that I want everyone to be happy and things to happen correctly. Right. And so when that fear is present, there can be a tendency to try to control outcomes too much. Can you see how that would be? It's so natural. There's no blame. There's just, you're wanting to make sure everybody's happy. And there's probably another fear underneath that. Like, what does it mean if not everybody's happy and things don't go well? Then what does that mean about you? That would be an amazing inquiry to do with yourself. And in this way, that can so easily lead to trying to control outcomes too much. There's also the piece when we don't fully trust that we're supported in life by the divine, by life, by the planet, by whatever you want to call that larger universe in which we're held. If there's a lack of trust for that, there can be an excessive tendency to control, because you don't, well, either it's not going to get done, as I already said about my go-getters, or that it won't happen your way, like the way that you want it. And in that case, what needs to happen is to really open yourself to the possibility that what you want could come in ways that you didn't expect. Yes, got it. I didn't feel supported by him. So key. If you don't feel supported, either in your relationship, either by the divine, or by family, or by friends, or even by yourself, if you don't feel supported, of course you're going to grip. There's no shame in that. It's just what happens. So the focus there is not beating yourself up for gripping. It's on, how do I cultivate more of a feeling of support? Just yesterday, I told a client to do some yoga, like some restorative yoga supported by bolsters, so she could internalize the physical sensation of feeling, of releasing into support. Many of us, we've been clenched for so long, just like getting shit done, right? Is that an accurate depiction? Clenched so long getting shit done that we forget what it is to surrender to the seat, to surrender to the floor, to surrender to the bed, And so one way that you could train yourself on what it physically feels like to be supported is get a bolster, some blocks, things like that, and do some yoga poses, or lie down on a bolster and let yourself feel what it is to let go and be supported. This creates a kind of buoyancy. So as a scuba diver, I'm all about buoyancy. You have to have good buoyancy to take good underwater photographs. And the thing about buoyancy is it's twofold. One is the part that you do. You choose the right amount of weight for your vest. You fill the right amount of air in your vest. You I'm calling the BCD the vest for non-initiates, but what I'm talking about is a BCD. You do your part, and the water holds you. Like when you get your part right, when you're aligned and you have the right amount of weight in your BCD, you have you're breathing at a rate that is good and sustainable, and you're relaxed, because you actually have to relax to be buoyant. The ocean holds you, and you feel weightless, and it's effortless. Now, most of us, unless we're scuba divers, have never had that experience, have never had the physical experience or emotional experience of showing up, doing our part, and then being held, being relaxed and held. Why? Because most of the people we're showing up to, their nervous systems are whacked out too. Janky. They can't hold you because they're just barely holding it together themselves, right? Which is why I'm such an advocate for practicing breathing exercises and meditation and movement and qigong and things like that that smooth your system out. Because till your system's smoother than it probably is right now, it's going to be really hard to hold anybody else. And it's hard to relax and receive holding, because there's a bracing that's constantly happening. Yes, tightly strung, exactly. That bracing, that tightly wound thing actually blocks support from coming in. So there might be support all around you. I mean, in gravity, we are supported by the planet. You stand up on the planet, there's a floor there, there's ground there. So we are supported, at least, at the very least. You know, we could trip out about sinkholes and earthquakes, but for the purposes of today, we're supported by the planet. So it's possible to have the physical experience of support. And then how do you extend that into being available for the energetic and emotional experience of support? Yeah, I mean, this is so huge. And, you know, thank God for this. I definitely feel supported by friends and some families, so his lack of support was like sandpaper. And that's the thing. You have a template for what support feels like, which is awesome. So you could feel when it was not there and then recognize, oh, not the right person. So it's beautiful when you have a template for support, because then you can see so clearly when that's not happening. Okay, back to control. If the way, so here's the thing, we have different ways of doing things, right? I like to do the dishes right after I use them. Patrick likes to do the dishes. He likes to pile them up and do them all at once. So that used to drive me crazy. And I would ask him like 10 times a day to wash the dishes. And that was annoying. And so I stopped doing that. And we, you know, we talked it through, we worked it out. And part of it was I recognized I had a fear that if the dishes didn't get done right away, they would never get done, or that I would end up doing them. You know, I'm talking about him doing his own dishes. So, and I just, you know, every now and then I might be in a generous mood and I'll do all the dishes, but more often I'm not. More often I'm like in a time crunch and I just want to do the minimal number of dishes, i.e. the dishes that I made, and have a clear sink when I make more dishes again so that I can wash my dishes again. And it's, you know, over the last 7 years, it's just been amazing to notice how different it feels if I say something about the dishes when I'm in a calm, clear, centered state, and when I'm not. And when I'm not, invariably, he gets defensive and it doesn't feel good. So again, it comes back to the state you're in, the fears you have, being clear about those fears, and developing some humor about it. You know, like now, if I catch myself being controlling, I'm like, oops, I'm being controlling, right? And we can laugh about it. It's just, you know, yeah, it's just what's there, right? Now, the thing to recognize is just because you like things done a certain way doesn't mean that's the only way to do them, right? So part of the controlling and learning to let go of control is recognizing And sometimes Patrick has said this to me. He said, I may not do this on your timeline, like go to the store for something that we need. I may not do it when you think I should do it, but it's going to get done. Can you trust that it's going to get done and let me do it my way? And I think that's the key to practice. Can you trust that the thing will get done that you've asked for and allow the person to do it their way? Because who made you the arbiter of everything right? Who made me the arbiter of everything right? Nobody. There's a zillion ways to do things that all work out. Some might be faster and easier, some might be harder, but they don't mean wrong. They don't mean they're wrong if it's harder. And so have a little chuckle with yourself, like, oh, am I thinking that this way is the only way to do things? And if so, can I loosen that grip and recognize as long as something gets done, it doesn't really matter how it gets done? Now, if it doesn't get done, that's a different conversation, not for today. I think I've done other lives on topics of communication and things like that. But for the purposes of today, I really wanted to talk about what's going on when we try to control. And it can be a fear of chaos. It can be a fear of things falling apart unless we do it right. It can be wanting to control outcomes to make sure that everybody's happy and feels good, as Dana said so beautifully. And I want to know what's landing here. I'd love to have some more responses before I recap. I'm going to start recapping soon. And the thing to remember that if the way the other person wants to do something that's different than how you want it done, if it doesn't create harm and actually will get the thing done too, how about practicing just letting them do it that way? Take your hands off the reins, delegate the thing, and then leave it there. That's a good practice for you, for your own expansion. These sandpaper, it's so funny. I used to talk about, so I'm kind of a monastic by nature, and relationships always felt like sandpaper to me. So I love that you use that word, Giordani, but like, they just felt like sandpaper. It was a thing to help me grow, but that I didn't enjoy very much. I knew I should enjoy it. And I enjoyed a little bit. Of course, I enjoyed it enough in the beginning to get into the relationship, but eventually it was like, oh, there's my shit. Here's the sandpaper. This person's annoying. I'm out. Until I really started working more deeply and specifically on relationship over the past 8 years. Yes. Okay, so if there's no further questions or no further epiphanies or responses, I am going to go into a recap. Today we are talking about control. We're talking about hidden ways that you tend to be controlling and what to do about it. And the first place to understand is that we control generally because we're scared. And it's a behavior we learn to do to mitigate, as a stay against fear. Maybe our childhood was chaotic. Maybe it's chaotic inside. And so control was the mechanism that was developed to handle that, to survive in that. So there's no shame in it. Accept it, understand it. And if it's having a negative effect on your relationships, choose to do something about it. Choose to create some new wiring by taking new actions. One way that we tend to control is when we create rules and conditions instead of holding a boundary. So a boundary, as Mark Graves said so beautifully, walls keep people out. Boundaries show people where the door is. A boundary is how you can love someone, how you can open to love someone and let them in. Rules and conditions tend to come out of fear. There's a tightening, there's a grip. This might be something you feel more energetically than obviously. So I'm asking you to tune in here and be a bit sensitive to yourself and where you're coming from. Anytime that you're acting out of fear, that you're trying to make things be a certain way out of fear instead of desire, you're likely controlling. You're trying to control the situation. And what you need to do there is first recognize that there's some fear operating, get clear on what it is, have compassion for yourself. It's okay that you have your fear. It's allowed to be here. It just doesn't have to drive the car. And then drop under the fear and ask, okay, well, what is my true desire here that's under the fear? What do I really want? And then once you're clear on what that is, ask directly and vulnerably for that instead of imposing rules. It's going to feel super different. It's going to feel probably pretty scary. You might sweat a ton the first few times you do this, but it does get easier. A thing to remember is the difference between a request and demand. So if you're asking for what you want and the person can feel free to say yes or no, that's a request. If you're asking for what you want and the person feels contracted, like they're contracting, and it feels like, well, the only option is yes, or there might be punishment, or there might be repercussions, or whatever, then that's a demand. And so I suggest you develop clear communication with the people you're close to about if you're asking for something and they're contracting, get curious there. Oh, was that a demand? Or are they contracting because they're a people pleaser and they just hate saying no and they have a hard time saying no? It's not even about you. You just made a request and they freaked out because they're like, I don't want to do this, but I don't know how to say no. That wasn't about you at all, right? But in case it is about you, your check-in is going to be, was that a demand? Was there any energetic transmission that yes was the only acceptable answer here? Because if so, that's your work to clean up. If the way that the person you're trying to control likes to do things is different than how you like to do things, but the things still get done, and the way they're doing it doesn't create harm, practice letting it happen their way and sit in the discomfort of that. The only way to retrain an overly controlling nature is to get comfortable in discomfort of letting things unfold in different ways. Now, if everything falls apart and it doesn't work out, don't use that as evidence for why you need to control. That's not the takeaway. So in this way, you can expand your relationship to control, to your own nervous system, because the state that you're in has a lot to do with how what you're doing out there lands with other people. So if you notice you're in a tight, anxious, fearful, constricted, driven kind of state, it's going to probably land more intense over there with the other person. And it might land as control, even if you didn't mean it that way, simply because of your state. So that's the thing I wanted to leave you with. Be gentle with yourself. If you notice you're controlling, have compassion. It's what you learn to do to survive. And you might want to change those behaviors now so you can learn how to thrive, because the behaviors are not the same for the two things. Check your state. If you need to learn how to be more self-regulated, reach out to me. That's one of the things I do. I teach people is how to befriend their nervous system so they can be more connectable and expansive and open and kind and free in their relationships. And be aware of the fears that drive you and do something about it. Work to feel more supported. Inquire, how could I feel more support in my life? Maybe doing yoga, laying back on some bolsters, feeling supported by the bolster is a place to start. Finding a supportive friend, asking for some support and really receiving it is another step, right? Just start having an ongoing inquiry into how do I train myself to feel more supported so that I can let go the grip and not have to control so hard. So this has been Hidden Ways That You're Controlling and What to Do About It. I'm Marie Elizabeth Mali, your relationship transformation expert. Reach out to me if you have any questions or want to connect. I have an amazing assessment that shows you in about 5 minutes what's working great in your relationships and what could use your attention to improve. So drop the word partnered or single in the comments and I'll get that link to you. And I wanted to come back to this comment. Yeah, this is beautiful. This is very informative. I've been told I'm controlling. I'm going to practice what you suggested. Go with the flow more. Think about what is going on inside before reacting. Beautiful. That is such a great place to start, to really recognize like, oh, I want to control here. And, what is it that's fueling that? And could I let it go? Could I ask for some help instead? Could I change my demand to a request? Could I make sure I'm okay with a yes or no? Any of the options I suggested earlier in the video would work well here. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, remember that a great relationship starts with you.